Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. Now, normally I have my monologue at the beginning, but I'm going to move that to the end because I actually have a lot of guests and a co-host this episode. My co-host is Kelly Jackson Higgins, executive editor at Dark Reading. Kelly, thank you for being my co-host on this journey.
Thank you for having me, Dale.
I wanted to have actually at S421, to have something on the Women in ICS issue. The fact that there are so few of them, that it's hard for them to get into it, for their careers to progress. I wanted to have something on that. And then, of course, we couldn't hold the event. So I knew I wanted to have this show about this topic. And then I got a bunch of great women as guests, as you'll see. And we started talking about it, and I quickly realized that I might not be able to ask the right questions. Like, this is still an area that I'm trying to grow my understanding and awareness on. And you obviously have been in the tech industry for a long time, and you've held a lot of panels on this. And quite frankly, you had a couple of crucial conversations that really helped me with this issue. So I do appreciate you being my co-host and helping me through this.
Oh, I'm glad to help. Thank you.
Before we bring on our first guests, is there anything you want to say to frame the issue, or should we jump right in?
I would just say that as a woman in the field, I've seen a lot of things over the years, obviously, but I also think every woman in different age brackets, different sectors of the industry, different time frames of her career has experienced something different and has an interesting and a useful perspective on this topic, and that we're all kind of not talking in the same script. In other words, I think we're going to learn a lot today. I find that every time I talk to women about this topic, I learn something that I didn't think of or that I didn't know. And there will be some common themes, but there's also a lot of unique experiences out there.
And we did try in the setting up of the guests to pick people in different parts of their careers in different parts of the industry to hopefully highlight that. I think that was one of your suggestions. So why don't we jump right into it, because we have a great set of guests. Our first pair of guests are Megan Samford. She recently joined Schneider Electric, where she is the VP and Chief Product Security Officer for Energy Management, and Najo Ifield, who is on the Global Advisory Board of CS Squared AI. So welcome, ladies. And maybe I'll just throw out the first question. You both have been in this field for a number of years and had a number of positions, really fantastic careers. So you've managed to move forward. I'm curious, though, what sort of daily issues you still see? What are some of the daily challenges that a woman might face in being in the ICS security field and being a woman in that field? And Megan, let me throw that to you first.
Sure, and thanks so much. It's lovely to be here with everyone and to see some great faces that I haven't seen in a while. Just in terms of daily challenges, I think that it comes down to the spectrum of activities that we see within the cyber field itself, where say you're a female that's up and coming in your career, or maybe you're just starting. I can't say that industrial control systems security would come up on a day-to-day basis in a way that would necessarily provoke a response from a female that, oh, this is something that I'd like to learn more about, or who can I connect with? I'm not sure that those apparent initial networks and friendships that a person would need to find more information about the field would be readily kind of front and center to a young female in her career, or for that matter, someone mid or later in their career that is working in traditional enterprise cyber, where the invitation would come up to learn more. And even if you broaden that topic out a little bit, if you look at fields that touch ICS, but it may not be inherent, something like Homeland Security or supply chain operations, these are areas that I'm terribly interested in expanding upon, because I believe that we can begin to pull some good talent from them, but it's not necessarily innate as the first thing that people think of when they think of ICS security. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I guess maybe one way to look at this is, Najo, right before we went on, you said, I have so many stories from my career that I think are important here. Why don't you tell one of them? What is one of the stories that you think would be enlightening to both our male and female audience?
Well, just to add to Megan's point about these types of careers not being widely heard about or available or a lot of information, especially for women, because our community within ICS cybersecurity is so small. But yeah, I fell into the industry by accident and started out in technology, moved into cybersecurity. That was by accident. And then it was a pipeline operation company that I used to work for. And this is 20 years ago, and when they were starting to connect assets to the internet. And I was young in my career. I didn't know. I just inherently knew that was bad, but didn't know why. And now fast forward to where I am now. Well, now I can tell you why it scares me. And it was hard because there's not a lot of women to support each other. When I looked through my LinkedIn network of 2,200 plus people, so far I've found 45 people that are women in this industry, and that kind of doesn't seem exactly right. So there's not a lot of support there. A friend of mine calls it a death by 1,000 cuts. So all day, every day, there's some behaviors that aren't warranted or wanted, and you need to have some thick skin in order to survive. And I'm hoping that through this discussion, and thank you, Dale, so much for hosting this, is that we could inspire some women to be in the industry, but also educate and empower men about maybe behaviors that they're not sure that they're even demonstrating. So a friend of mine, we hosted a couple of these events over the years. And it was always surprising to me that the men were the ones to come up and thank us because they had no clue. And so that's, women were a little bit tired of trying to solve a problem or fix a problem that we didn't create. But I want to be part of that solution.
Well, Kelly, I'd like you to ask a question here, but as I heard both the ladies talk, I've always thought this was a tech issue, almost a woman in tech, and ICS security is a subset of tech. Do you find that either the cybersecurity subsection and even the ICS cybersecurity subsection to be worse than technology as a general? Are we lagging that, or is this more of a universal tech issue? And then feel free to ask a question.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a microcosm. You do still see more men and in technology in general. I think cybersecurity still has its own identity crisis at the education level in a lot of ways. Everyone understands what an app developer does, but they don't necessarily understand what cybersecurity incident response analyst does. I feel like there's still some level of education for educators to build that path, that career path for students as well, and to get interest, not of all people, but especially women as well too. I've seen, I would say there's kind of like you have the tech side, which is still male dominated, cybersecurity, and then ICS even more so. I remember the first S4 I went to, I think there were 3 or 4 women and 2 or 3 of us were reporters. So it's come a long way. It's exciting to see women on this panel, for example. So I think, we've made progress, but I feel like there's still sort of a knowledge gap, getting the word out, getting kind of what Najo was saying about, being able to get the information to women and giving them the opportunity. And I guess my question for Megan and Najo is, I know you all are doing things in the industry. Can you give some examples of things that you're doing to help bring women into the field, and maybe any advice you would give young women who are like, hey, I want to get into cybersecurity, I don't know how to do it. We see a lot of new people coming in now, which is great, but how are they, what's sort of the path that's getting them in? I guess
I don't mind going first. So I'll give you a recent example in that there were plenty of women that I graduated with in my Homeland Security degree. I'd say that it was a pretty even 50-50 split in the mixture of men and women that were interested in taking that career path, which in and of itself, as a security person, I think that that's a tremendous success, right? That the interest level is there. So I think that the problem is an interest level, because I think inherently women do a pretty good job of protecting things. I think that by nature, Many women are good at analyzing data. We're good at analyzing threats. We're good at making quick judgments. We have a lot of the characteristics that predispose us to being good in the security field. And you saw that first up with Homeland Security. And so when I got into cyber, and in particular, product security incident response, you mentioned the incident response aspect of this. I was pulling from my Rolodex and I said, I'd really like to get another female on the team, but the other females that are within my immediate circle are already in pretty well-off cyber jobs. So I said, are there any females that I could pull from my Homeland Security background from when I was in the government, and could I teach them cyber? And it turned out that I was right, and that I identified a candidate that I had worked with in the past, and she had an A+ attitude. She was the type of person that could look at a problem, and what's important to me is a person that can analyze a problem and then take positive action on it, right? Because that is a lot of what we need in security. And she absolutely was that person, great attitude. And so we brought her in, and she came on board in the company after me doing some convincing that this is a qualified person. This is not a hire that we're going to regret. She came on board, and within a year, she was already undergoing certifications for ICS Security. I think it's the GICSP. She took that certification and she passed it. So we definitely can pull more women into the field. I think that we need to set expectations, and we need to champion the value story within our companies, that this is something that can be achieved, that we don't necessarily have to pull from traditional ranks. But I will say, notwithstanding that, there are plenty of women that work in traditional cyber that I think it would be an even easier segue into ICS and OT security. But again, that's on us to bring that value prop and that education and that information to them, to where they want to join us along for this journey as well, because we need more of them. I can't tell you how excited I get when I'm on nonprofit calls or calls with the Department of Homeland Security or DOE or even global international security calls, and I see other women in ICS. I mean, it's very empowering and it's very exciting to us. So, Najo, did you have anything else to add from that? I'm sure you do from your experiences as well.
Oh yeah. So Megan, you're right. I think women do, we're used to problem solving, trying to calm waters, the nurturing nature that women have. And what I really appreciate is men in the industry that acknowledge that and can speak to what a diverse workforce means. How in their teams were they effective in solving problems, and critical thinking and the diversity of thought. So I'd love to see more men that have diverse teams speak up and tell other men why that's important. As for the young people that I've seen in the industry, we had a program with the University of Houston and doing outreach with them. And these were graduate students in cybersecurity looking for, what job placements and whatnot. And what those students did absolutely wowed me. They came up, introduced themselves, shook hands, connected on LinkedIn, followed up with very polite thank you notes. And it's all about the network. And anyone that's watching this can feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to make introductions. And then there's also things around business language, and someone getting into the field that understands business requirements and can speak to the business, and not necessarily just jargon and acronyms that we kind of get caught up in cybersecurity. Presentation training skills, super valuable, and communication skills. So a lot of people in cybersecurity are on the spectrum. And when I heard that, I didn't know what that meant. And I investigated and I researched and I tried to learn more, because some of my colleagues one-on-one were amazing, but in a group environment, it was super tough. So the more that you can learn about how the person you're talking to needs to hear information, the better that you're going to do.
Well, it's interesting. I've experienced some of what you said at S420, where we took some steps to try to increase the number of women speakers, but honestly, I don't think our steps were nearly as big of a contribution as the Women in ICS reaching out and bringing others in. As Megan, as you talked about, I really noticed that there seems to be some good momentum there in that. But before we end your segment, we've been talking pretty rosy here about positive things. We haven't talked a lot about impediments. Would either of you want to tackle some of the impediments that need to be removed for women to be more prevalent and more successful in this space?
I don't mind going first again, in that the basic challenge, and this is not specific to our field, it's not specific really to any profession, it is a societal bias, in that every few months or so, I run into this encounter a lot, and Najo, you can tell me if you've had the same thing happen, and Kelly as well, but I was in my gym, like I was in my local gym prior to COVID happening. In fact, it was one of the last times that I got to go to the gym, but I had a guy like just walk up to me and try to strike up conversation. And he was like, oh, you look like you've had a rough day at work. And I was like, yeah, just thinking over things, I'm not really trying to engage this person in conversation. And then he says, you're a career woman. He said, let me guess, you're a nurse? And I was like, no, I'm not a nurse. He said, you're a teacher. And I was like, no, I'm not a teacher. I have tons of love and respect to them, but I'm not either of those professions. And he was like, well, what do you do? And I was like, I do cybersecurity. That's what I do. And I mean, I'm sure that at that point I was kind of short and snippy with the guy, but you still kind of face this in cybersecurity, in that I would go to partnership meetings at different companies that I've worked with, or people that were outsiders that didn't know me, and I'd sit down at a table and I'd take my laptop out, and they immediately thought that I was the person that was there to take meeting minutes, to do knowledge capture for everyone, or that I would be volunteered to do that because I was one of two females in the room. And at one point, I remember being in a meeting and saying, hey, I don't mind doing knowledge capture at all. I think that it's a skill that everyone should be comfortable doing, and you should be doing it on your own as well. But, I'm someone here that was brought here to help walk you through the discussion and to make decisions with you. I'm not just here to do your knowledge capture and send out your meeting minutes. So that's, again, I think women can often be labeled in that type of scope of a role, or a technical project manager, a TPM, because that's so much of a lot of what you still see is women feel invited to be in those roles, right? They feel very comfortable doing those things because that's what they're invited to do, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable or invited to step into positions where they have to have a strong opinion or a strong voice or a leadership role. And I think, honestly, that's a societal gap, right? But that's my experience, but not all of my experiences have been that way. And for the most part, it's been more positive than negative. But those are very clear examples that if you see this type of behavior happening, do what you can to step in and kind of clear the air in the room and make it better and make it more positive.
One of the boards I was invited to, and with a name like Najo, if you haven't looked at my name on LinkedIn, you wouldn't know if I was a man or a woman. And I walked into a board meeting. I've been invited to be a board member, and I'm like, hey, hi, excited to be here. And they're all like, hello, like, are you lost? I'm like, no, I'm here for the meeting. And they're like, what? I'm like, I'm Najo Ifield. And everybody just kind of like big surprise looks. And when I saw the agenda and how I was introduced, it's like Mr. Ifield, and he's been doing these things in the industry. And I was like, oh boy. So I'm always trying to overcome that. And then also my husband works in cybersecurity, and we don't introduce ourselves as being married, because as soon as they are introduced to him, I'm discounted. I'm like thrown aside. Nobody wants to know who I am or what I do. So we introduce ourselves individually, and luckily we have different last names. And then eventually people figure it out, and they're sort of surprised that we didn't say it from the beginning. And when I share the stories, they're like, oh yeah, we had no idea. We just, because people think I'm just the wife tagging along. And actually one of the business meetings that I was invited to, the guy turned around and he's like, "Who are you?" And the client executive said, "Oh, with Najo and Chris, you get a 2-for-1 because she's actually in the industry. So we invite her to our events because she adds a lot of value." So there's all sorts of biases in the industry. And the one thing that I will say that shaped the world for me was having great bosses and seeking out great bosses, because I've had amazing ones. One actually messaged me this morning. I haven't worked for him in over 20 years. And he was on my mind about what I needed to, impress upon people in this conversation. And if you've got a progressive boss that's supportive of your career, no matter where you are in your career, that makes the world of difference. So that would be my kind of little piece. The impediment is finding that great boss and interviewing not only the company, but the person that's going to be your business leader.
Well, I really appreciate you both being on the show. We've got a number of great women to bring on board, so we're going to move on to our next pair. But thank you very much, Megan and Najo.
Oh, thank you guys so much.
Oh, cut her off. That's okay. So Liz, producer Liz has a hard job here with 7 guests. So can you bring on Kristin and Jules, if they're both here? And if Jules isn't here, bring on MJ. Okay, great. So our next 2 guests, we have Kristin Demoranville. She is an IT/OT ICS. She does it all, trusted advisor for numerous firms. And we have MJ Emmanuel, who's an incident response analyst focused on ICS at CISA. That's the DHS organization responsible for cybersecurity. So Kelly, since I hogged the questions last pair, I'll let you start here.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that came up in our previous conversation was there's sort of oftentimes an unconscious bias for assuming what women may or may not be in the industry. But I'm curious about, first of all, MJ, what brought you in? You're in the incident response side of things, which with maybe unconscious bias would be a surprise to some people, right? A woman in that particular sector. So tell me a little bit about how you got into it. And, one of the things we also talked about earlier was a lot of times women aren't necessarily given the information, the opportunity to know about the options in these fields. So how did you find out? What drew you in?
Sure.
How did you get there, basically?
So I'm going to give some inside knowledge that I usually don't talk about because I don't want people to discount me because I don't have a technical background. But I actually have a bachelor's of arts from a small liberal arts college in environmental studies. So that was my initial background. I wanted to do science-driven environmental policy. And then somewhere around my junior year of college, I ended up studying abroad in Brussels. And I ended up doing some work with someone who ended up influencing the GDPR legislation. So that was kind of my first, introduction into technology policy, privacy policy, like that sort of like that field, and that kind of opened up a door for me. So I ended up applying to Carnegie Mellon to do what I thought was going to be technology-driven policy. Somewhere around those 2 years in grad school at Carnegie Mellon, I realized that policy maybe wasn't my calling, but I was actually succeeding in the technology classes that I was taking. So all the instructors in my program were from SEI or from CCERT. So I spent about 2 years, nose to the grind, understanding, what is networking. Like I came into that program not even knowing what a port was. Like I didn't understand any technical knowledge. And then through the internships and coursework that I had there, I came out of it, like a little pipeline into becoming someone who understood deep technical problems. And then I worked at this place called the NCFTA where I was a malware analyst. And then I've been at CISA for almost 2 years now on the incident response team. And I'm one of the most technical people on the incident response team. I'm equal to anyone else. So it's definitely, something that I don't like to talk about always, just because it does make people discount where I come from. But now I feel pretty confident in myself. And as I grow at CISA, understanding that it doesn't matter where you come from, as long as you have the skills and the experience, that's what's important.
Well, it sounds like
you're awesome. Just let you know, I think you're awesome. And it's funny because I have a degree in environmental management. So, and I worked in policy for years. So you spoke to my beating little heart here about everything. I feel for what you just said. So yeah.
I mean, if we want to get like philosophical about it, I kind of see like environmental studies as like the natural environment. And I see infrastructure as being like our built environment. And
Exactly
so
right.
in my head, it actually isn't that crazy. But when people hear it, they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And it's actually interesting to understand because you understand how cycles work. Environmental cycles are very similar to a lot of our security cycles.
Exactly.
It creates this way to like explain things to people who don't even understand what you do for a living. So it creates that relatability. So that's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Dale, go ahead.
No.
I had a quick follow-up that I think we all wanted to jump in. We were all interested in that story. But did you have anyone who was very encouraging to you as you were making this odd transition? Was there a person, a role, was it just your own self-confidence that you could do it?
It was mostly myself. I think like when I was applying to Carnegie Mellon, when I was still an undergrad, all of my professors or anyone, I was like, what are you doing? Like they weren't negative. Like they weren't negative. It just like they couldn't understand why. And then I think like when I was in grad school, I don't know. It was okay when I was in grad school, and like our class was pretty 50-50 split with men and women. And I actually didn't really have. I guess most of my professors were men, but there wasn't really any bias that I encountered. It wasn't really until I got into the workforce that I started to realize, everything isn't going to be sunshine all the time. But when I was in school, it was pretty neutral in terms of any biases, which was nice.
Okay. Sorry, Kelly, I hijacked that. Go ahead and ask another
That's okay.
one.
I just thought about the one thing we were talking about before was diversity, and diversity of thought is a really important thing in security. Some of the skills you're talking about are probably just as important, right? Is the analysis, the ability to analyze, and you actually just made a nice analogy to Kristin did to the network, to the environment. I mean, there all these things kind of have their own similar themes, and you're able to think outside the box a little bit. I'm wondering, Kristin, from your perspective, and did you said you had a little different path as well to the industry. Were there particular challenges from the beginning that you had that you would sort of pass on to a new person in the industry coming, say, watch out for this, or here's something that I learned,
Sure.
I would do differently?
I came into IT first, like most of us did, since we're kind of, the older generation now. And I wish that someone had told my 19-year-old self to stand my ground. So if something didn't feel right or smell right or taste right or any of that, I would just have said no. I think it would have saved my heart a lot of ache, and it would have built me to be a little bit stronger because, I mean, let's be real. Most of us have stories of sexual harassment through most of our jobs. And I wish I had seen those signs a little differently rather than just, the normal corporate trainings, if you will. And I'm not saying any of these corporate companies I work for or anything like that was a problem. That's not what that is. It's an individual issue. So I want to make that clear in case any of them are listening. But I think that I would have told my younger self, just be strong, stand strong. And then if you have something to say, you better say it and don't just sit there and be quiet. And I learned when I was older that just because I'm voicing my opinion doesn't make me, for lack of a better term, a bitch, because I'm not. And I'm just stating how I feel. And I think that's the big difference between men and women in the industry is a lot of men can get away with saying things where us women, if we said the same thing in the exact same tone, we would be looked at like we were nuts. And I've had a lot of that subtle sexism come through in different situations because of it. And I've also worked on a global platform. So I've dealt with cultures and subcultures. And then, that's really hard. I mean, I remember going back to my hotel room in certain countries and just bawling my brains out because I wasn't even acknowledged in the room because I was a woman. And that's not my fault. It's not like I chose my gender. So that's become quite the thing I wish I had said to my younger self. Be strong, stand your guard. If something doesn't feel right, say something. And then don't take no for an answer. Keep pushing. And that's really what I wish I had said. And I was lucky enough to have an intern that's actually getting her degree in cybersecurity a couple of years ago, which is still amazing to me because, I mean, we didn't have that back in the day, obviously.
Yeah.
And she wants to focus on ICS, and she's trying to go down that path. And she saw how I was struggling with some of the things I was going through with diversity. And she is a Black college student, so she was really concerned for herself. I remember us talking, and she actually just messaged me the other day and said she's gone back in to get her degree. So I was really excited to hear that she's actually still continuing to pursue. She was such a great asset. That girl is going to be a CISO someday if she wants it.
Awesome.
Like, that's how awesome it is. So I love that encouragement and that ability.
Liz, if Jules comes on, just bring her up if she joins. She might have gotten busy. But I'm going to ask a very selfish question here.
Sure.
I think there's certain behavior that most people would realize is terrible, right? And that happens more often than we'd like to admit, that leads to the problem that we're discussing. What I worry about is the things that, let's say someone like me who thinks he's self-aware, might be doing that I'm not aware of. Like, you mentioned subtle, Kristin, in your last answer. And I'm just wondering if there's things, and I've heard some of them, like not paying attention to the woman in the room, assuming she's in a certain role, things of that nature might be subtle. But I'm just wondering if there's other things for our male viewers and listeners that they would say,
Definitely.
We're doing this and we're not trying to hurt anyone, but we're part of the problem. So any examples of that, either one of you?
Sure. When you walk into a room, or if you're going to give a presentation and you say, hey guys, how are you? Come on. You don't know who people identify as. You can't say that anymore, regardless of gender, or for male or female. There could be a non-binary in the room. So you need to be careful. I had, when I waitressed way back in the day, good Lord, I had an elderly woman, probably about 92, yell at me for calling her a guy when I walked up the table, because I said, hey guys, how are you? And she literally read me the riot act, and it stuck with me since then. But on top of that, it really irritates me when I'm in a meeting, and even if it's primarily women, they're saying guys, and I realize it's a casual term and yada yada, whatever. Stop. Just stop. Don't do it anymore. Say folks, everybody, hey, just cut it out. Like, don't do it anymore. And then I think that acknowledging that there are women in the room is really important, and calling on them to ask questions, and if they have questions. And if you notice that other peers are pushing down on them, meaning they're not allowing them to speak, you say, I heard that you had something to say. Please tell us what you had to say. That's huge. That's so huge. And I have a lot of male colleagues that are advocates that have been trying to do that more in their meetings. And that's been such a big deal. Also, it's just subtle things that people think are jokes, that it's just, I was recently asked to review an ICS security textbook, which it was very flattering and I appreciated it. And I started reviewing the outline. And one of the chapters was called, and I quote, "Woot, I get to go deeper," unquote. And I declined the review because of that comment. And the woman who was the manager of this book or whatever said, oh, well, he means technology. Go deeper into technology. And I said, no, that's not professional. Nobody wants to hear that. It's not even remotely cute. Please, I can't do this as a woman. Like, that, I won't do it. So you have to find somebody else. And I think those little things, like, we let that kind of stuff slide too much, where people think that it's just cute. It's not cute. It's a bad look, and it needs to stop. Anyways, MJ, I bet you've got some too.
Yeah. So, before when Dale asked me to come on, I was trying to think of like a deep cut, like maybe something that people don't realize they're doing, that maybe people haven't talked about before. And the one thing that I came up with was, I have seen, this kind of goes along with what Megan was talking about earlier. Not women that want to be like project managers or technical project manager roles, but technical women that get asked to do project manager roles because they are more organized than their male peers, and that kind of thing, where women get kind of voluntold to go do organizing roles that none of their male peers get asked to do. And I think that happens a lot. Yeah. And if someone wants to do that, that's totally fine. Or You know, if you're asking men and women to pick up the slack for a group, that's totally fine. But like, I can think of one group where they just happen to have only asked women to fill this detail, but there's only like 5 women on a team of 30 or something. And so it's not random. Like it's making people fit a stereotype that maybe they don't want to do. And so I think, you know, being aware of your own biases, if you're like a manager or and you're trying to fill roles for a team, I think is really important. Just making sure that your idea of who is good at something and what do they actually do, and is this something that's going to help their career, or is this something that you're just relying on someone's natural abilities as being more organized, instead of allowing them to do some more technical work that they might rather be doing.
I think another one too, to MJ's point, you just made me think of it, how we perceive things in a room is we always say the tech guy or that guy, right? And most of the time it's probably going to be a girl at this point because, you know, we're pretty predominant in support. And I know quite a few women that are in, support IT, and they get stuck with that all the time where they show up. And as an example for me, when I worked in support, I would have a guy trail me the entire time. I'd be in his house or be on with a client at a store or something like that, where they wouldn't trust that I knew what I was doing. So they were just monitoring what I was doing. And it was always so infuriating because, of course, they'd be like right here and you'd be like, wow, you're so in my space. Like, would you do this to a guy? No, you wouldn't. So I think it's just rhetoric and being aware. And the problem with becoming aware is then you have to deal with your own guilt of the things you've done. And I think that is a hard moment to swallow, especially if you are not that kind of malicious person at all. You're generally a very caring, kind individual. And you start to realize, oh my goodness, I contributed to this problem. And I think that's how I've been dealing with my male advocates is, look, I understand you have guilt, but you need to move past that because we don't have time for this. Like, you have to keep pushing forward. You have to do the next right thing. That's all you have to do. I forgive you. Let's move on. You don't need the blessing and forgiveness of every woman across the world. Like, you just need the one that's in front of you. And then you can pick up and keep going. So I think if we start changing rhetoric and we start treating women as equals, meaning the same, literally the same, like we're not any different. We add value and the same as men, just differently, of course, because it's an individual thing. I think that's what we need to do. I don't think we need to stand out as special because we don't want to be special. We just want to do the job. Like, that's it. And we love to do our jobs. And that's the problem. We get hindered. I was talking with a friend of mine this morning about doing this. And I said, the thing that's hard is it's all the extra stuff we have to think about when we're sitting in a meeting room. Do I look okay? Am I appearing okay? Am I talking okay? Am I talking slow enough? Am I talking fast enough? Is my pitch okay? And then you start questioning your confidence. And then, do I have all the material? Oh no, I'm over prepared. You know, you go through that in your head, and then you start to go through, did he just say that to me? Wait a minute, was that what's happening? And then you start to freak out because you realize that you just were mansplained. And then you have to freak out again. Why did I just get mansplained? Is this guy doing it on purpose to steal the meeting or something like that? And then you start to go through all this mind games where men just sit at the table and they just, boom, it's all there and it's done. And we're the ones sitting there like constantly turning all these additional thoughts that aren't necessary. And it's so much wasted energy. And if we just could say and act the same, that'd be great. And we would get so much more work done. And that would be beautiful.
I always get so nervous when I have to meet new people. Like, I know that I have the respect of my peers at work. Like, I don't really have to deal with any issues at work because I have a good reputation. You know, people know who I am, etc. But like, you know, doing incident response, I'm meeting new people all the time. I'm like going in and helping them with a problem. You know, it usually I know how to carry myself and know how to, you know, quickly get the trust of people because you have to. But it's just like, oh my gosh, I have to do this again. I have to tell people like, yes, I am an incident response. Yes, I actually do analysis. Yes, I can actually help you. And it's just like, wow, I would really like to not have to prove who I am. And, you know, I know that's not necessarily a gendered problem, but I think it is, you know, like you're at least like starting at a lower bar or people's expectations are maybe lower where they meet you at the very first. And so you kind of have to prove yourself. And that's definitely something that I'm definitely aware of.
And it's such a waste of time, isn't it, MJ? Like the fact that you have to like prove yourself, like, hey, I do know what I'm doing. You know, I actually had to do that with my dad. For years, I was in security and in technology. My dad was like, what do you do? Like, I'm like, Dad, don't download that. What are you doing? So now he sends me everything. Is this spam? Am I being phished? I'm like, yes, you're being phished. Stop touching things. Like, and it's so funny that I got to this point where it took me years, a decade probably, to get him to like agree to my technology skills. And now all of a sudden he's just like, you know, I'm the IT person, if you will, now. And it's hysterical. Same. Kristin, should I order this router? What do you think about this access point? Like, Dad, okay, can you call Geek Squad? Like, I mean, I just can't do this with you right now. Right. But it's just so funny that even in families, it's still kind of viewed weird, you know? And it's so funny how you have to kind of crack through biases all over the place. And it's the community of women, though, Dale. And I think we alluded to it in the first group, that if it wasn't for the women that we have around us right now, like, I would lose my mind half the time, because we can call each other up and just be like, hey, I just want to have a sanity check here. How do I feel about this? I mean, we're family in a way. And S4 especially has brought a lot of us together. So thank you, Dale, for that, because we couldn't do our jobs if we didn't have each other, to be truthful. We have a community that's really strong and beautiful. And thank you for that. I really do appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. And I noticed that community got quite a bit larger at the last S4 we had. Well, we actually need to move on, but thank you so much, Kristin, and MJ. Appreciate your contributing to the show. And Liz, if we could take them down and bring our new guests on. We have now, I believe, if this all works, I know Selena was having some trouble, but Selena Larson, who is a senior cyber threat analyst with Dragos. Yes, she's looking a little blurry these days, but hopefully we'll be able to hear her. And Najla Lindsey, who is a scientist, and interesting enough, she is just entering the ICS security field. So we wanted to have someone new in the field. And Liz, again, if Jules shows up, you can add her in. I think she's probably having some difficulty, so we'll just go forward. Kelly, why don't you kick things off with this part?
Sure. I don't want to skip over you, Selena, but I have to ask Naja a question, because coming into the industry as a newbie is really interesting to me. And I saw on your bio that you were previously in forensics, but was it digital forensics, or it was a different type of forensics? Now you're moving towards cyber. What drew you that direction, and did you have how did you make that move, and did you have sort of a mentor to help you find the route that you took to get here?
Hi, everyone. So I actually have a background in forensic science. So at the time of my programs, I went to Penn State. There was only biology and chemistry, no like digital forensics. That wasn't a thing. And so now with, technology is moving, at the speed of light, it's like, I don't want to get left behind, right? And so now I've taken the initiative over the last couple of years. I think I started all of this whole cybersecurity just journey in summer 2018. I just was like, digital forensics is just a easier way for me to transition. Yes, technology. I think technology is teachable, but the investigative part and that investigative mindset really helps for me to transition and really help me to understand things. So over the last couple of years, I've done a lot of self-study. I've had the opportunity to attend some SANS trainings. I have built up my community just by, sharing what I'm doing. Sharing daily tasks of what I'm learning, using, free resources online. Anytime I see something, I would save it. I have like a very lengthy notes section in my phone of like links and GitHubs and, resources that, have information, YouTube videos, everything. So I think with me particularly, I just dove right in after being in forensics. It's going to be 9 years. Actually, it'll be 10 years. Wow. It'll be 10 years here toward the end of the year in Q4. I just decided, I've been doing this for a while. I'm specifically in toxicology. So think about like drug testing and things like that. I said to myself, you have to learn something new. You have to challenge yourself, learn something new. And cybersecurity is one of those things. And, just go for it. Find, your community, ask questions. And that's just the approach that I take. And as far as, getting into ICS, that just came about recently with talking to someone that I did a panel with for, a series that I did back in August. They said to me, hey, you work with medical devices, which is true. I work with different medical device vendors as the user. And they just mentioned to me, actually it was Isaiah Jones. He mentioned to me like, hey, you should look into, the ICS side of things. And like, again, I went down a deep rabbit hole of finding everything that I could, find. And people have been very, very helpful with me and sharing resources. So I'm very thankful for that. And that's where I am now. I've only been on this ICS journey for about like 6 months. So that's how this is all going, and cybersecurity just in general as well.
I think we lost Selena. I was just going to ask her about her experience. I think there's more resources out now.
Liz, I think Selena's back. Can we add her back in? Oh, there she is.
She's coming back. Nope.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to ask her a question too. Selena, you're still on mute, so turn that off. But
sorry,
the reason I put the it doesn't sound like it's going to work out. So I appreciate you trying, Selena, but I think we're probably going to have to pull you down because we're not even getting your voice. Bye. Liz, maybe you can bring up Najo or somebody else to fill out the 4. But I'm curious. So you're moving from forensics into this field. Mm-hmm. What has the reception been like? You had someone like Isaiah recommending it, a couple others. How about the people that maybe weren't in your corner? How are you being addressed as you went out for interviews and things of that nature?
So for interviews, I think a lot of the times, and I think there's a disconnect in the industry, and I think a lot of people have always mentioned that. I think that a lot of companies are looking for these senior analysts and senior consultant roles and not thinking, hey, these people are eventually going to retire. So if you build up your company and teams very top heavy, when it's time for you to fill these roles, you don't have any junior people to train and actually curate and to transfer that knowledge. So I've been on interviews with companies and, I'm at a place where I understand, I'm not trying to come in at the top of the line. Like that's not what it is. I know that, I have to put in some extra work because this is not my, specific background. And I make that plain and clear. I'm very straightforward and transparent about, what I can bring to the table. And in some instances, companies have ghosted me, meaning they haven't gotten back to me with a yay or nay. Mm-hmm. Or they turn around and say, oh, well, we want someone more senior. Now, I know for a fact that I do my resume to make it look like I'm not a senior person. I know it. I know I'm not. Yet they still, I feel like they're wasting my time and they're wasting their time interviewing me for roles that they know 9 times out of 10 that who they're going to choose to fill the role. On top of you sending me through 4 or 5 rounds of interviews, I have a job that I still have to, do. You're not being considerate of the time that people are putting into, doing this interviewing. And I think that, the industry as a whole, not even just ICS, because I'm fresh in that. I think the cybersecurity industry as a whole has to, take a different initiative and not be so top heavy with looking for these unicorns of senior people that know all of this information. You're not going to get anywhere because what will happen is that transfer of knowledge that those senior people have, it's not going to get transferred to the new people. So then you'll have to teach them all over again everything that could have been taught if they decided to curate and help the junior or entry level people into these type of positions. But I have had, for the most part, for 95%, I've had very great support. And in turn, they send me people send me resources. They recommend me for stuff. So it's been very helpful. Normally the people that get on my nerve or, have just not been supportive, I usually just ignore because obviously, you can't see what I'm doing and I'm not really trying to, make you see what I'm doing. This is for me and not for anybody else.
So as a foreign national living in the United States, I've been so frustrated with the job search down here. And I'm really sorry to hear about the ghosting. That's my biggest source of frustration. But what I'm understanding is there are, and Kristin mentioned this, that there's diversity recruiting and quotas to be made. So, and there's also the possibility of lawsuits. So if you don't recruit internally or you don't recruit properly, you open yourself up to potential lawsuits. So instead of looking and trying to find the best person for the job, there's all sorts of politics going behind it. And you're 1,000% right. Like there's no, and I like to call it knowledge share. You've got the technical experts that have been at it for 20 years. And then we need the people that are just coming out of school and a blend of everything in between. And that's actually more palatable for a client. When I worked for a Fortune 500 company, we had people that were billable for $600 an hour. Now, if that person landed the shuttle on the moon, I maybe could get behind that rate, but most clients, they can't afford that. And so how are we training the young people and those that are interested in the industry, and maybe those veterans that are retiring, who have that natural protection about them? Like, how are we approaching that and doing that? And I think we are doing a terrible job.
You both touched on something that we write a lot about at Dark Reading, and we try to understand the whole concept of companies now looking more at diversity and inclusion programs. There's sort of this we see sort of confusion sometimes about what somebody mentioned in the chat of what's considered a quota, quote unquote, and what's legitimate, really trying to get diverse voices and representation on your team. I'm wondering, what, I guess start with Najla, if you're seeing companies that really are trying to, honestly try to get a more diverse workforce, more thought, different types of thought, different types of experiences, or if you feel like that's still such a new concept to a lot of companies that they're not really doing that.
I think it's a lot of talk and not a lot of actual action. I think these companies are actually scared to bring in that diverse thought, because it shouldn't take, current events, or it shouldn't take, bad things happening for you to decide that, hey, we need some outside perspectives. If you have a group of people that think the same, you're going to have tunnel vision. You're not going to see outside of that specific tunnel vision that you have for those goals in that organization. Now, tunnel vision isn't a bad thing, but as far as the group think, yes, it can be bad. You don't get a fresh set of eyes. You don't get fresh thoughts of, different strategies and solutions to solve these problems. You're going to keep banging your head, and you're not going to be able to scale your company to grow. So to me, I think that some companies are, they may just be afraid, or they, it's just all talk. I think that, some people, they'll share, I think it's important that we train, new people and, really get them settled into moving and progressing through, the different career choices. But them actually doing it, no, I haven't seen it personally myself. I think that there is an opportunity to do it, but even if it's not officially through your work, right, through your company, I think you as a person can take the initiative to do it as well and mentor somebody that doesn't look like you. I'm not saying they have to look like me, but somebody that doesn't look like you. There is opportunity to do it. You don't have to wait until your company does it. You can do it on your own. So I think that's why I say that they're not really taking action. You're trying to tackle a very large problem, and you can do it individually. You don't have to necessarily do it with your company. So that way you're transferring your knowledge as well. So that's my thought on that.
There's a very large software company in the world that has quotas for hiring women. And on International Women's Day many years ago, some of the young women stood up and they had been hired as part of that quota. And it was awful for them. It was a terrible experience because, we've heard studies that 60% of men men will apply for jobs that they feel that they're 60% qualified for, whereas women want to get closer to 80 or 90 or 100%. And these young women shared these stories that they were intimidated and they knew they were in over their head, and it was a very frustrating experience. So that's why quotas I don't think are the way to go. But the problem is we're not providing a very warm and welcoming experience for women to be in the industry. We're just not. And we're doing our best, but I know that we can do better. This, Dale, has been amazing, and this is the start. So having the men step up and stand up and have a voice when they have a platform, and I love that you've acknowledged that you're not 100% sure that the path that we're going on, but giving us an opportunity to speak to the women and invite women into our community.
Well, as talking about inviting the any of the previous people that have been on, Megan, Kristin, I'm probably missing some here. If there's something you want to say to close, just put something in the chat, and Liz will put you up for a second here to close. But I really appreciate how I reached out to get guests on this show, and I thought it might be tough to get 4, and then there were 6, and I probably could have had 20. So I do see the community growing in that sense. But Kelly, you can obviously continue to ask questions, but Kristin, you popped up. I guess you heard something that you wanted to comment on?
I actually threw it in the chat. I recently watched a TED Talk from a company. It's a consulting company. I forget exactly who it was, and I apologize if they ever listen to this. That we need to treat this like a business problem. It is a business problem. And how do we treat business problems? With metrics. And I'm not a big metrics fan. Trust me, I don't like math, any of that stuff. But it makes sense to me. How do you handle this? You actually have to have data that shows it and actually have actionable items to attack those problems. And we haven't actually done that. I mean, sure, we've got quotas and all that other fun stuff for diversity, but we don't actually have showing the biases of reviews, how men are getting higher pay raises and bonuses than women, how we come in at lower rates than men because we're too afraid to ask, or we're just not because of the bias. I think we need to have better metrics, even in our own small niche of security. And I can say that from an IT level as well. I've got women that are so scared to ask for a bonus when they deserve one. How is that monitored and again, put into a metric platform? I think we should do that. I think that would be really important. And I'm speaking to hiring managers if they're listening. Pay attention. Don't just, unfortunately, don't go through that with, women. We need to actually have the ability to compete on the same level rather than, oh, you're just a woman, I guess we're going to hire you or whatever. It's just stupid.
The quota thing isn't genuine. It's not a genuine effort.
It's not.
And we can feel that it's not a genuine effort. Like it's not something you can hide. So if you think that hiring on quota is going to do you any good, it's actually going to backfire in the long run. It may look good on paper. Yeah, it may look good on paper at first, and you're getting whatever numbers you need to get. But in the long run, it's not going to do anything for you. And so be genuine in your efforts to reach out to people. Be genuine in your efforts to hire people. Give people a shot. I've had someone. When I was back in August, someone reached out to me, a manager at a well-known company. And he's white male, he flat out said, I normally just call people that I know to ask them to fill these roles. He said it. And I was thankful that he said it because he realized that, I need to do something different. And I was like, well, let's continue this conversation. And we have built a relationship, of mentoring and, him sharing things with me and learning more about the field in general. So taking that actual step that was his action. He reached out to someone and wanted to curate a relationship. So the opportunity is very there. You have that opportunity, take it.
And I think, Megan, you had one parting word you wanted to give here before we wrap this up.
Sure, and I can only speak from kind of my experience, but I can tell you 2 things. I think that who your boss is matters a lot. If you don't have a boss that is looking out for you and giving you visibility, you should leave that boss. Number 2, is if you don't feel like a rock star at the company that you're at, you should leave. And honestly, you should not waste your time, because you can go to a place where you will have a good boss and you can feel like a rock star. And those are the two things that will catapult you to success quicker than anything else. And it does, yes, it does matter to us as individuals, but who you work for or where you work is really what honestly makes or breaks the deal.
Great. Well, ladies, thank you very much for helping us with this issue. Obviously, we don't solve everything in an hour, but I think it certainly helped our listeners and viewers, and appreciate your time. You've done a number of these. You've been in the industry, so you've experienced some of this firsthand. You've talked to so many women that have experienced it. You've done panels. What stood out to you in the discussion today? Was there anything that maybe was different or new, or is it just emphasizing the issues you've known about for years now?
I mean, some of the same issues are still there. There's still these old-fashioned societal norms that we face every day, right? And sort of implicit bias that people have, they don't realize they have about women and minorities, underrepresented people. But what my big takeaway today from this conversation was something that I've heard bits and pieces over the years, but I think our guests really hit it home, and that's have an advocate, a connection, someone who helps you sort of navigate this. Like when you first come into, say you go to your first ICS conference and you're a woman, you don't know other women, meet someone there who can introduce you to people, make you feel comfortable, give you that shot. Because a lot of times as women, we do feel a little bit less confident in sort of putting ourselves out there. It takes a while to feel comfortable doing that. But if you have someone who's your advocate, your support system, or even just an alliance, so someone you have there that you know, who can kind of introduce you around, give you that chance to get in there, and then do your own networking. That's kind of what some of these women were talking about, all the things they've done on their own. Just that first time they had a little bit of an in with somebody that gave them the introduction or gave them the information, they took it from there. So I really think, and having a great boss, that to me was the most important note. I personally had the same experience. I have a male boss who I've known for a long time, and I knew him before I worked for him, who literally has done so much to help my career unselfishly all the time. And that means everything. And I totally agree with that, because if you don't have that, you're not going to ever be able to thrive. And I think that's a really important thing for women, especially. But I think, you do see, I not to sound like an old fogey here, but I notice the younger women are much more confident and more, they come in much more confident than we did. Back in my day, sounds like I'm 100 years old, but I was less confident. I was the person who would have looked at my younger self now and said, why didn't you stand up for yourself? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? I do it now. But early on, I had nobody to tell me that, or no one to help me with that. So I think some of the advice here today was incredible. And I think the younger generation is more ready than we were probably to embrace stepping into industry where we're still a small number of in the big picture of people.
But it's probably because it's less lonely than it was when
you
were starting out. I mean, I even think you've been coming to S4 since like 2013. And what you said at the very beginning, when you first were there, it was you, it was Kim Zetter, it was a few women reporters, maybe Marina.
Yeah, Marina was our.
But it was like a handful. So it was really not a lot of support. And I think at the last one we had over 70, almost 100 women at the event. So it probably is very helpful to have those relationships, to have people to talk to have people to learn from and help you out if you're having trouble. So anyways, again, I really appreciate you agreeing to co-host this with me.
It's my pleasure.
You do great work on the issue, and you're one of my favorite ICS security reporters.
Well, thank you. That's a huge.
You always do a great job. So I appreciate that beyond just this issue. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
I want to thank again all my great guests in this episode and my co-host, Kelly Jackson Higgins, executive editor at Dark Reading. Kelly, I couldn't have done it without you, so thank you so much. I didn't do a monologue at the beginning, and I really want to talk a little bit about my experience with this issue vis-a-vis S4. Now, I've always, probably like a lot of people in this world, I've always thought that I approach this issue with an open heart and an open mind. When people submit to speak at the event, that I always looked at it and picked the best, regardless of race, sex, creed, color, all those factors, just looked at what the topic was going to be, what the presentation was going to be, what would be best for the attendees. And I think I did that since 2007. And even as late as S4X17 in 2017, we had half of our keynoters were actually women. Now, there was no special effort to make this happen. Some years there were more women, some years there were less. That was probably the high watermark, actually, for the event up to that time. But then the event in 2018 occurred, and we had almost no women in the event speaking. I think there were one or two. It was a really small number, very noticeable by a lack of women. And I got quite a bit of blowback on that from some men and some women saying, why didn't you have more? I went back and I looked through the submissions, the possible talks, and really I found there weren't any even in the gray area submitted from women that should have made the talk. So I guess a part of me said, hey, I'm being fair. I'm not discriminating at all. What's the problem here? But then I had a lot of people pushing me, and I talked to some people, Kelly being one of them. I had a couple of what I would call crucial conversations with her to better understand the issue. I think there were parts of Brotopia, the book, that were incredibly helpful for me. And there were actually some men that talked to me about this that were very helpful as well. And as I looked at it, I was trying to find, well, I don't want to be in a position, as you heard in this podcast, where I'm doing quotas. It was interesting to hear that the women were not for quotas in that sense. But there was definitely a case that if I looked at my circle of people, the people that I reached out to for talks, they were primarily male. So it's not a surprise that I was getting mostly responses coming in from male. And from a very pragmatic standpoint, I said, if I want to have the best possible event with the best content on stage, well, if I'm only getting submissions from half the population, then I'm missing out on a tremendous amount of good talks. So starting in S419 and continuing in S420, we reached out to any woman we could find in the industry and encouraged them to submit a talk. Again, not because they were a woman, not to submit a quota, but just to say, we want to get talk submissions in from the widest range of people possible, actually the entire population we would like to see represented in the submitted talks. Now, for S420, we got a record number of submissions from women, and some of those were fantastic. And they were some of the best sessions we had at the event. And quite frankly, some of the submissions were quite bad, and they didn't make it in the session. So I think what it came down to was, if we get representative submissions in from the population, then we're going to get, some are going to be great, some are going to be bad, and we will have a representative set of presenters. And that's really been how I've been approaching the issue. I don't know if that's right, I don't know if it's wrong, but it's the way I've been approaching the issue. And I would say that although we did much better for S420, I'm not sure it was our outreach that did it. If I had to put anything as the key factor, it was that the Women in ICS community is growing, that they're supporting each other, that they're encouraging each other to submit their ideas. They're encouraging each other to come on stage. And anything I can do to help with that, I want to do. But we're keeping working on this issue. It's a tough one. It's something that we all need to do better on. And I would say that just looking at the industry itself, we talk about there being a lack of people to fill the roles in ICS security. Cybersecurity in general, but definitely ICS security. So if we're going to need so many more people, and we're not taking advantage in terms of getting quality people from half the population, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. So it's in our own vested interest to do a much better job on this. And I plan on continuing to try to understand it better and do a better job on it. I encourage you to do so. I would imagine some of you will have comments and questions on this episode. Please, if you want to record your comment or question, you can go to dale-peterson.com. On the right-hand side, you'll see a little little button there or a little tab, record your question. Click on that and simply record your question. Or you can email us at s4@digitalbond.com. That's it for this episode, and I'll talk to you next time. Something warrants an unsolicited response.